Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and I'm coming at you with another Wargaming and miniature video. In this video, what we're going to be doing is creating some movement trays. This is for those of you that have hordes of miniatures. You play a fantasy game or a medieval warfare game where you've got a bunch of individually mounted figures and you need to move them around as a unit. So these are unit movement trays. Now I'm building these trays for my Napoleonic games, and I have 4 figures mounted on a 40 by 40 base. But units come in various sizes between 4 to 6 bases. So I'm going to be making some column movement trays. Now you can make them line movement trays. You can make them extremely deep movement trays. You can make them extremely wide, like for orc hordes or anything like that. But today we're just going to make 4 40 millimeter column or square movement tray, and then I'm also going to make a cavalry movement tray, and my cavalry bases are 50 millimeters. 50 millimeters is technically 2 inches because you got 25 millimeters per inch approximately. Okay, so I'm going to show you a technique using cereal. This is Frosted Flakes, you know. They're great. Okay, I'm going to be using that for my infantry, and cavalry, and then I'm going to be using a painting palette. This is a pre-made painting palette that is 4 inches by 4 inches, which happens to be perfect for cavalry. So what we're going to do is these come pre-wrapped in a plastic. We're going to make sure we... What did I do? Yeah, we're going to make sure we cut the plastic off of there. So we are going to be making 2 movement trays. Now you want to make sure that you've got all the materials that you need. See, that just comes right on off. Trash. Okay, and then, so this is going to be the base of my cavalry, and then, which is a little bit bigger than these bases. These are only 40 millimeter. The cavalry is going to be 50 millimeter. Before we get started, there is a couple of things you're going to want to assemble, and I have them all right here. I've got my E6000 or Gorilla Glue clear grip. I have that. I have my school glue, my White Elmer's PVA. I have some paint. You can paint your... I'm going to prime them with black, and then you can go later in and paint them any color you want. If you want them green, or you can even flock them or whatever. You want to get your cardstock from your cereal box. I'm going to set that off to the side. You're going to want a straight edge ruler so that when you're using your X-Acto knife and you're cutting, you're getting straight lines. You want a pen in case you need to make any notes or write anything on these, like cut lines or anything like that. And you want to have a cutting mat. Now I have a pixie stick here which has like a rounded edge, and this I use when I'm applying the glue to sometimes reach into the movement tray and scrape out any glue that, and when I do it, it'll basically give you like a round edge when you scrape it off. There you have it, and that's really all the supplies you need. So now what we're going to do is on the cavalry tray, we're only going to mount we're just going to do the 3 sides, because this is already a really hard piece of matte board, which has got a piece of canvas already stretched and glued onto it. It comes pre-made just like that. Because this is so hard, I don't need to go on all 4 sides. On the infantry one, we will, and I'll explain that when we get there too. Okay. Having said that, you've got I got a strip of the cereal box. This is basically just one of one of the sides. This is half of one of the sides, basically. I took a side of the box, cut it in half. It was a family sized. There it is. That's half. And I've already pre-cut it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this little end off here that we don't need. We don't need them on either. And this has kind of got a fold in the cardboard. I kind of want to avoid that. So I'm just going to cut that off as well. Just because I'm a picky person. Done. Okay. So now with this, like I said, we're going to go 1, 2, 3 sides. But this is long enough to cover the entire. This is longer than 3 sides, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now I'm going to lay this down on here. I'm using this as my measurement to kind of measure how long a side is, right, from end to end, and use my pen. I'm going to mark it, and I'm going to just score it. That's all I'm doing, is just scoring it. I don't want to cut all the way through. I just want to give it a place where I can fold it. Now I'm going to take this, line it up with my score. And then I could just take this X-Acto without that and just score it this way, saving a step. There. It doesn't have to be straight or anything. Now when I go to the end here, from where I line it up to, now I'm cutting that off. Okay, so I've got 3 sides. 2 of them are scored, right? So I can fold this in half if I wanted to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the side, and then I'm going to tuck the side underneath so I could glue it on. Now this edge doesn't have to stick up very far. The bases that I'm using in this game are only about 3 millimeters thick. So you look at it about with the base and the 3 millimeters, it looks like it's about a total of 6 millimeters or so. That's, you know, that's only 2 of these base heights, and it can be a little bit more than that or what have you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a spot that's approximately 2, and it doesn't have to be exact. It does not have to be exact. Exacting is kind of a good thing. Now I'm eyeballing it down the length of the walls. These I call the walls. And I'm only going to score it. Okay. So now we should have, I know you can't really see this, but we've got a score along the full length, and then we have a score across there like that. Those are the areas that I'm going to be folding. But before we do that, I'm going to take this score, find a spot where this score and this score meet, which is going to be right about there. And then what I'm going to do is cut out more than a 45-degree angle. I have a line here that I could use, and I also have a line here that I could use to determine where the 45-degree angles are. But really, I'm just eyeballing it, and I'm not even doing it at 45. I'm doing it at more than a 45. You know, you could do it really super extreme like that, but I don't want to do that. And this I'm cutting all the way through. Okay, that's all the way through. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing from the same point, going away from the cut. So I'm cutting a wedge out of my wall piece. Got it. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the end, but this end doesn't have to be a 45. It could be, I want it to be a very shallow. Very shallow. The reason why this doesn't butt up against another fold, but these both will butt up against each other, and I don't want them to touch, so I did more than a 45 degrees. Same thing with this side. Little triangular pieces. Those can be pushed off to the side. They're not going to be in use. Oh yes, forgot. This end, also the shallow cut. Doesn't need to be 45. Okay, so simple. We've got our cereal box, scored, 45s, more than 45s actually, just some shallow cuts. Now we have to fold it. Here we go. Where are we? What are we doing? We are folding away from the score. So first we fold there, we fold there. Simple, 4 walls. Now we're gonna fold each of these. I like to use a ruler sometimes to give me kind of a straight edge, knowing that I'm folding against a straight edge to help with the fold, to make sure the fold is nice and straight. Okay, so you can see that I've got the folds 90 degrees, and then I've got these folds. So now when I fold it, you see how that will tuck underneath and make like a little box. You could do all 4 sides. I find that it's not necessary. A movement tray is just kind of there to hold a unit of models. Plus, I put labels on the backs of my units, so by not putting a wall on the back side of the tray, I'll still be able to see that label. Even though it's not really that big of a deal, because you can have a label that's a little taller if you wanted. Okay, so you see that. And then this will lay down on the inside of that, like so. And then we'll have our little movement tray, right? Okay, so now all I need to do is just apply some glue to this. But first, because the cereal box has like a coating of paint and, I don't know, it's kind of like a semi-gloss. What I like to do is take an X-Acto knife and just scratch it, mar it up a little bit, just putting cuts into the cardboard to allow my glue something to adhere to. Take my Gorilla Glue. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure I put it in the corners. And along the bottom here. Okay. The corners along the bottom. Okay, the reason why I put it on the corners, just so you know, is when I glue the base on and I fold the sides up and I press it in nice and tight, it'll stick along the edges of the board here, causing the walls not to kind of fold out like that. They'll stay up like this. Okay. And let's see, because that's got the biggest fold, the last fold, I'm going to push that up close to the body. Or the front. That's what I meant, the front. Okay. It's in. I'm pressing down. I'm going to press along the edge here. Again, remember to kind of stick it against the side of the tray. I consider these to be the walls and this to be the actual tray. The base of the tray, the floor of the tray. And you can see along the tray, it doesn't stick up that far. It should only be about a base, one base height. That's really all you need. Now in the past, I put some rubber bands on these to hold them in place, or I push it down. A lot of times you need to do that with like Elmer's glue and things like that. But with Gorilla Glue, after about 10 minutes of pressure, it's pretty much in place. And then you just got to give it about 20-30 minutes to let it dry, and then you're all set. So technically, that's the movement tray. You can see how the base, how they don't touch. That's kind of the way I want it. That one was a little bit excessive. That's fine, right? And then a little bit of cut here just because there's no extra wall here, but I didn't want it to be sticking out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this off to the side and we'll get started on the infantry tray, which is done a little bit differently. Alright guys, this is the cereal box yet again. Also Frosted Flakes. It doesn't matter, it can be any cereal box. This is the size of the base that I want. I want the movement tray to be 80 by 80 millimeters. But instead of measuring 80 by 80, I just grabbed a couple of bases, laid them down in the pattern that I want it to be in, and then I am visualizing the walls that fold up, right? So I'm thinking the walls right there, that's a good wall height. Reason why? Once it folds, it's going to be one base and then a little extra. But because I want it to be a little bit taller, actually I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit. I do want it to be a little taller because when I cut it, I am not going to cut it along the, I'm not going to score it along the edge here. I'm going to give it maybe 1 millimeter, basically just very little bit of room around the whole edge to compensate for any miscalculations or any flock. Because a lot of times when you flock your bases, sometimes the bases aren't all exactly the same size, or the flock causes them not to fit together exactly the right way. So what I'm going to do is draw the base size, the whole base. See, I already messed it up. Okay, that looks good. That looks good too. Okay, so then we got our base size right there. Now I'm going to cut out the entire thing first. You can see that it's about 5-6 millimeters. And again, I'm eyeballing this. Cutting all the way through. Yep. Okay, that's all the way through. Now when you're measuring when you're eyeballing it, you don't want to be covering up the line that you drew. So you can't score it this way because now you don't know where your line is. So just flip it over. You can see your line now. That looks good. Now it popped on real good right there. Now what you're seeing here is the tray and the walls all in one piece. Okay. Now if I score it, it won't fold up very good, right? It won't fold up properly. But what I'm going to do is I'm still going to score it. And I'm going to score it just on the outside of where I drew the ink. And again, that's just a score. All right? Just on the outside where I drew the ink. So there's like a little bit of gray, what is this color? A little bit of brown between the ruler and the ink line. Which is going to give me about a millimeter maybe of wiggle room. Okay. Everything's scored. Now I still can't fold it because the corners would all be jacked, right? Okay. So what I do is I find where the score is and I cut all the way out. Just on one of them. And then I do the same over here. All the way out. I do the same over here, just on one of the two scores in the corners. What that does is it's going to create, one of the sides is going to have a flap. Here we go. So, following along. Scored. One side is cut. So now I have like a little flap here. On each of the sides has a little flap. Okay, so now what we do is we fold up the corners. Nope, wait, scored this side, fold against the score. So we fold the other way. And I'm doing it gently, just so I don't mess up and make a crooked fold. I want it to be straight. That's why I use the straight edge. That's why I use the X-Acto knife. I didn't freehand it because I want these to be straight. Okay, now why is that important? Well, this is kind of flimsy. This really is kind of flimsy, right? So when you score the sides and you fold them up, what that does is it reinforces all four sides, making them rigid. And then this whole movement tray will become rigid. You notice how I'm working it all the way around. I'm not being impatient and no. You got to be patient. Okay, so far so good. We're making progress. Now the tricky part. Not really so tricky, but the tricky is I'm going to tuck these tabs underneath. I want the tabs to be on the inside, not the outside. Okay, so now we lay them all kind of flat again so that I could fold the tabs, which I probably could have done first. Okay, so we got our tray right here, right? We have our tray. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply, okay, we got to get a little bit more. You got to get more than a 90-degree fold. See how I'm kind of folding it excessively. So now I go with my Gorilla Glue, my handy, oh wait, before I do that, take my X-Acto knife and I score the corner where the tabs are going to lay against it. I hope you can't really see that, but I'm scoring like this little section right there. Just so the tab and the Gorilla Glue will glue into it. And I put a drop of Gorilla Glue in each corner. Doesn't have to be excessive. Make sure that the tab and the side wall all get a little bit of glue on them, but don't press them together because you're going to let them dry separately. Okay, so the sides and the tabs all have a little bit of glue on them. I'm going to let that sit there for about a minute, and I'm going to come back and assemble it. All right, so it's been about a minute. So now what I do is fold this up, apply some pressure, hold this together for about 30 seconds to a minute. Do the second one, hold it together, 30 seconds to a minute. All right, when I get all these held together for about a minute a piece, I'll be back. Okay, so now I've held each of the sides for about 30 seconds to a minute. They are stuck together. They're drying. You can see that you've got a nice little movement tray right here, right? And with this being a flat surface, it's laying on there fairly flat. And it's not dry yet, but so I don't want to put up some pressure on it. But you can tell that these walls are going to keep it from moving this way, and these walls are going to keep it from moving this way. So you're not going to be able to fold it up in the middle, or it's basically going to be rigid as hell. Rigid as heck. Okay, now I'm going to continue to let this dry probably for another 20 minutes because I got to let it dry before I start with the final finishing steps. Okay, this isn't even, what the heck? What? Okay, this one's got to be held a little bit longer. I'm going to let it dry for another 20-30 minutes. Because there's one more step. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to try to make it visible for you. Okay, this should be better. See how that's not even? And on the back side, you can see how that's not even. And there's a little bit of edge there, not much, but it's really pronounced. Where I'm losing it. Okay, right there. See how it's sticking up, and right there where it's sticking up. Well, what that is my eyeballing was off. I cut, instead of straight lines, I was cutting some lines like this. So causing it to be thicker here than it is on here. And so what that means is as soon as it's finished drawing, I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and cut that off. I'm going to trim it off. Or I could take my X-Acto knife and lay this down and go snip. And then right here and just go snip and just basically get some, make it look pretty before I paint it. Okay, so let me just apply some pressure on this. Give it about 20 minutes. All right, so in the meantime, it hasn't been 20 minutes, but this is a little trick that I've learned from my time in the wild, is that you've got rubber bands, right? And if I put a rubber band along the edge, I'm going to go ahead and do it right now. It will pull all the corners in. Right, and it'll keep everything pressed against each other, nice and tight. I want to put this closer to the top of the, whoa, too far. There we go. Closer to the top. Keep everything flat. Perfect. Set it off to the side. I'm going to do the same thing with this one, even though it doesn't really need it. I think it's already finished. But just for those extra 20 minutes. All right, I'll be back. Give me 20 minutes. All right, guys, welcome back. Now, as these are drying, I'm going to go ahead and set these off to the side. And I do want to show you that I have a couple of them already finished where I can show them off to you. I've already primed them black and we get to take a look at them. This was the cavalry one that I primed the bottom of it as well as the top. You don't necessarily have to prime the bottom, but I did just for a universal feel to it. That's it right there, and that's what you move around on the table. Now, one of the reasons why you might want a movement tray is, let me get this out of the way. Like this is a cavalry unit that I have that I will be moving around on the table, right? You notice it's not going to be too hard to move around. I can move this around without too much issue, but there are a couple of individual pieces here, and then these are metal, so these have a little weight to them. So when I'm pushing them around, I tend to do stuff like that, and then I got to pick this piece up, or then they're crooked, or sometimes they're apart like that, and it just becomes, it's not a pain, it's just time consuming. So what I do is I make these movement trays, and just like this one, and then I can just take these figures and put them in the tray ahead of time. There. So now I've got this unit, and I can pick it up like this from the corner, and I can move it around. I can position it however I want on the battlefield, right? And then this is just easier to move, and that's my cavalry unit. That's why you would make a movement tray. Now, this is an infantry unit in a movement tray. Right? This is the cardstock movement tray. Now, you notice how it's covering up the label a little bit? Well, normally this guy's not in the back. Normally he's up front. Okay. So then it doesn't cover the label, right? And if this was only a base height, it also wouldn't cover up. But this is just slightly higher than a base height. But so you do the same thing. You're moving the guys around. You notice how it's pretty sturdy. I can hold, and figures aren't going to fall out of it. Yeah, and when it's on the table, well, first of all, I shouldn't be picking it up like that, but I'm going to be picking it up, moving it around. I'm going to be going do-do-do-do-do, you know, moving it just like that. And it's going to be just fine. But units like this don't necessarily need a movement tray, just like the cavalry doesn't need a movement tray, because there's big base figures. But because there's these extra pieces, these skirmishers, these are the ones that cause the issue on movement. You go like that, and oh yeah, let me get this guy back. Or you got to use two hands. That way you don't have a hand on your ruler and a hand on your figures. You've got to two-hand it when you move them. Okay, so by putting it in this cardstock movement tray, it moves actually a little bit better. Okay, now here's the clincher. For a unit like this, okay, this is a skirmish base unit, right? So I've got 2 figures per base. 4 figures represents, you know, something similar to that. But they're set up on bases like this so that if I wanted to have them go into skirmish formation, I can. But when they're in battalion formation and they're trying to move around, or if they were individually mounted like Warhammer or something like that, it would be a pain in the butt to move this. So you take this and you put them in a movement tray. So they're in the movement tray. Now I can move them around as a battalion with no problems. I got them on the battlefield and I'm flinging them around. If I need to, I could pick this unit up, right? I can move it around on the battlefield. I can use my ruler you know, in one hand and the movement tray in another. And I can go, okay, I'm going to move them over here and then I'm going to attack you. You know, and so that's why you build movement trays. I've got a bunch that I need to finish building for my Quatre Bras game, but that's how simple and easy it is. I'm going to go out and paint these guys, and they'll come out just like that. All right, guys, thanks for coming out and checking out this movement tray tutorial, how to and the reasons why, and I'll see you next time.